Greetings again, art history class. I hope you are doing fantastically well as we continue on our journey of non-Western art history. Today we're going to continue on the path of enlightenment through Buddhism and hopefully attaining, or at least learning how to attain enlightenment through nirvana. Now, as we are looking at Buddhist art and some of the images that show up, one of the things that becomes very important when we're looking at Buddhist art is the idea of these particular hand gestures. And the hand gestures are called mudras, which you can actually see up here, M-U-D-R-A-S. Note, we saw significance in hand gestures in Indian dance as well, specifically the dance towards Shiva with these beautiful articulation of the fingers. The same is going to be true of Buddhism, which should not come as a surprise, because remember, Buddhism and Hinduism developed about the same time period, dealing with many of the same concepts that talked about. So the first thing we want to talk about is here. So if we look up here, we will see some of these more often than not that it will actually let you know of as we're going through. So one we're going to see is dhyana, which is contemplation, center or home. The idea of this center space that shows up. The most important one here is the have no fear gesture, the mudra, the Bahaya mudra, which is literally the gesture on some level of coming up with pointing down. And so it's the have no fear, that you have nothing to fear from me. You have the idea of entryway in here, namaskara, which is the idea of this, the idea of adoration, particularly with the bow that actually shows up, the idea of compassion, turn your hand and flip it over, you're offering someone something. When we look at vitarka, that's the teaching, the office, and don't forget we also have the Buddhist wheel one coming up for the first teaching that showed up, where you actually have that wheel that you're making. And then finally, Dharma Chakra, which is the idea of continuous energy that actually is going to show up. And so when we're looking at that, that is the idea of continuous energy. We're going to see a number of these played out in different Buddhist elements and Buddhist concepts, and it's verbal cues on how to read the gestures that's showing up. Now for us, one of the things that we're starting to learn at the end of last class is that, like Christianity, where there's Roman Catholic and Presbyterians and Southern Baptists and Methodists, evangelicals, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Huguenots, there's a whole different range of different types of way of being almost every religion, including Christianity, but also including Buddhism. And so after the Buddha's death, there are differing opinions that arose concerning the correct teaching and practices of Buddhism. And eventually, and that is still true today, there are three main Buddhist traditions that formed: Theravada, Mahayana, and the Tibetan version that shows up. So Theravada means the way of the elders. It is the oldest tradition, and they believe that the best way to attain nirvana is to either be a monk, a nun, or an incredible amount of meditation. They believe in finding one path to enlightenment, and it's very much being an individual. You will often see Theravada monks in large orange roads, walking around, praying down, bowing down the way of the elders, the Theravada. The most common versions of Buddhism today are Mahayana, and that is actually included in the Zen tradition as well. So it teaches people can find and help each other to help enlightenment. You can seek out a teacher. You can seek out a master. You can seek out a friend who actually, it's not necessary to be a monk or a nun. What it recalls, and what you need to be is dedicated. So they believe in the idea of bodhisattvas, those individuals that basically have learned so much that they can help guide you, and you can find a teacher to help you along. Enlightened people generally don't have to pass through nirvana. You can stay on here to be able to help others, which is considered the highest calling in Mahayana Buddhist. Tibetan shares many of the Mahayana teachings, but they also believe in special techniques to harness spiritual energy, such as chanting can help you lead to nirvana. The idea of the creation of particular artworks are not just about celebrate, but absolutely harnessing energy to heal people, to help them along the path to nirvana as well. So again, there's the Theravada way of the elders, the oldest tradition. We're not going to see a lot of art that actually comes out of that tradition. We're going to see a lot of art. Most art comes out of the Mahayana and the Tibetan traditions. And the art, while similar in terms of the Four Noble Path, the Eightfold Course, it looks a little bit different depending upon the level of meditation involved. So as we start considering it, so the Vajrayana up here, that is another name or the fancier name that shows up for Tibetan Buddhism. And so this is called esoteric Buddhism. We're going to have this in Tibet, but this is also going to show up in Japan, but it's going to be a minority in Japan. It basically is practicing the womb world mandala. And so they're often going to use these very complex mandalas. This one was done by the artist Doji. And so this is a mandala that deals with Danichi, the great sun Buddha. That's right here. Notice around him, you're going to have the Buddhas of the four directions. And just like in China, what we talked about before, we're going to have the square earth plus the circular heavens. And when you combine them, you're going to get to the celestial universe. Now, the ways that you read these is you start from the inside and you try to learn as much as you can by looking at it and trying to understand the different elements that are showing up. When you think you have everything, you move farther out. And so in esoteric Buddhism, or Vajrayana, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, practitioners create a spiritual bond with a guardian Buddha or a guardian Bodhisattva during their initiation. They form rituals together. They sing mantras that will actually help them attain, like Om. They're actually going to be very big on the idea of mudra, the hand gestures that show up. It's going to have a lot of meditation, and the mandalas are going to enable enlightenment a lot. And so it really is a matter of kind of mysticism, Buddhism, spirituality, all put together. And that's really what we're going to see in the Tibetan tradition. Um, and so when you look at these, the mandalas then are basically cosmic diagrams of the universe. They portray the deities in order. And that's why you work your way out. Note increasingly the main deities. So in this one is Danichi, the great sun Buddha, then the Buddhas of the four directions, then the four wind directions. And you slowly work your way all the way out so you understand all the Buddhas and how all these individuals attain a Buddhahood. And how does that tell me I can attain a Buddhahood? What can I learn from them to meditate myself to Buddhahood? So you're going to learn, two more. We're going to learn the different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And we are assisted greatly by the works of art like mandalas. They're going to be very important for this tradition. And so an initiated monk may gradually work out from the center, meditating upon and assuming the mudras, hand gestures, literally trying to think, all right, what does this mean? What does the next image mean? What's the connection between the two? And then the hope is that the monk absorbs some of the deity's powers as they actually look and do the mudras gestures here. So esoteric Buddhism has very intricate, very time-consuming theology. Was a religion really for the leisured aristocracy. It's not for the masses. An agrarian farmer will never attain enlightenment through this particular way, where you literally have to spend hours, days, weeks, months meditating upon a particular mandala before you move to the next mandala, constantly in developing your idea. So it really is for the leisured class that shows up. A very meditative individual practice. And this is why a lot of creating a Tibetan Zen movement, this literally is the idea of these tiny little mandalas being made with individual grains of salt, individual grains of sand in different colors to share peace. And if you see this one is unity amongst all religions. Generally, after you make these, they take 1 week to make. Normally there's 8 monks that work on it. You know, the eight noble, or the right eightfold path plays out even in terms of the monk working on them. Around the clock or in 12-hour shifts. They actually collect all the sand, and then the sand itself is distributed across a waterway so it diffuses the energy of the mandala and that they had harnessed across the universe. And that's what we're looking at. So it's a very idea of esoteric Buddhism, very Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhist kind of idea. We do have an artist today actually working in the United States that takes these ideas in kind of, even though it's not technically Zen, he calls them shimmering Zens. So this is James Stanford, who actually lives in LA. So he does digital and traditional techniques to realize historic Las Vegas signage in neon as complicated mandala patterns. So this was designed really as Las Vegas Zen Gardens as well. He was the person that was responsible. So these are much more in the esoteric Buddhism, whereas Las Vegas Zen Gardens is very much in that Zen tradition that shows up. And as such, the dominant place where we are going to look at how the different variations of Buddhism come across, our major stopover is going to be Japan. Here's the flag of Japan with the wonderful sun right in the middle. So beyond that esoteric, which we'll see in a moment, the dominant form in Japan of Buddhism is this. So there's a couple of different names for it. We're going to call it, it's either Pure Land Buddha or Amidism, Amidism. And Amism is based upon the Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of boundless light who lives in the Western paradise. That Amitabha almost always is surrounded by Guan Yin, a very famous character in Japanese art in particular, and that is the Buddha of compassion, of helping others, of basically helping others, particularly as a bodhisattva. And then we're going to have wisdom, and this is the wisdom bodhisattva, someone who could have attained enlightenment, who no longer needs to be here, but stays here to help the rest of us. So this is actually represented then, note the beautiful red columns that we're going to see over and over in Japanese art, of Pure Land or land in the Western paradise. And that's ultimately what we're looking at when we look at this beautiful image. So they're going to be Pure Land sutras, so especially on immeasurable life. And sutras are little mantras, or sutras are little readings that we can do. They're going to help us attain Buddhahood enlightenment in this Western, compassionate, Pure Land area that shows up. So they're going to describe Amitabha and the Pure Land of ultimate bliss, where Amitabha vowed to save all beings and create Pure Land realm. It's waiting there for you, and all you have to do is practice and start to believe that you're going to go to the Western paradise, live a good, compassionate, and wisdom life based upon the Four Noble Truths. Try to let go of your material desires. Now, this is very interesting because in the Western tradition, when we decorate our homes, we want stuff. We need couches, and we need planters, and we need images, and we need artwork, and we need silverware, and we need all sorts of different dishes. If you were to go to a Japanese individual's house, it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. They generally have almost everything folds, and it's the natural elements. And oftentimes they'll have one area in a home, or maybe two areas with screens off, that they actually dedicate to art. And the rest of the home is dedicated to living space. The houses are much smaller. They have foldable paper walls that give beautiful reflections and light and shadows as part of the artwork as people and animals move around the house and then outside as well. So a very different experience. Part of that comes with the idea of the minimalist aesthetic that comes out of Buddhism, out of Japan, and the idea of let's get rid of our material desires, whether that's in Zen or whether that's in Pure Land Buddhism. So a very different approach, even to interior decorate, coming out of the cultural and religious traditions from earlier. Now, the Amitabha Buddha created an alternate path towards attaining enlightenment called the Pure Land path. As belief popular among peasants and the impure, it was much easier. Esoteric Buddhism is never going to appeal to the poor who do not have the time of day if they're farming 12 to 14-hour days. Hunters, fishermen, prostitutes, they're never going to be able to attain Buddhism. Today, Pure Land is the dominant form of Buddhism in China, Korea, Japan, and in Vietnam because of its ease of use within the process. To show you one of the most beautiful images from Amidism or Pure Land Buddhism is this right here. So Pure Land Buddhism, remember, is a form of Mahayana Buddhism. So there is a meditative practice that shows up. So this is a beautiful, beautiful image. This is actually of a particular Buddhist monk, a Pure Land monk named Kuya, Kuya, as you can see on the bottom. This is of him preaching. The artist here is Kosho, and it's done in the Kamakura period, painted wood, before 1207. Now look at that. This is a painted wood image. So that's a remarkable image for painted wood, particularly from 1207. And so what you look at is as you get closer, it's almost like you have the breath of life that's being poured out of him. Well, you'll note that breath of life are actually small little Buddhist people in prayer postures. And note there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Note up here. Namu Amida Boots. Namu Amida Boots. There's 7 syllables, but the last syllable is silent. And so each one of these represents the mantra, the kind of chant that he was singing to help you get closer to Buddhahood in the Western paradise. So if you believe in this and believe that you're going to the Western paradise because you're living a good Buddhist life and really are practicing and thinking about the Western paradise and what you can do in your life for compassion while you're doing that, you will attain the Western paradise. And so, although this is Kuya preaching, and his thing up here that he actually said that people should work on is Namu Amida Boots, Namu Amida Boots, Namu Amida Boots, which basically means all hail the Amida Buddha, all hail the Buddha of the Western paradise. Beautiful for wood. Now note, he is a monk and out preaching, and so he's got his lovely little gong right here that he can actually play, a little mini drum that will vibrate with the echo of the universe and vibrate through his body. He wears very little clothing except that what he needs, and he's got a deer staff here, which actually helps support on what he's doing. So he is literally out practicing the message like a monk, or like the Christian apostles later on in life. And so if we compare and contrast what we've seen before, the Lord's Prayer versus what Amida Buddhism shows with the Kuyu preaching. So here's what Lord's Prayer is. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Many years of Roman Catholic school there. On the opposite side with Kuyu preaching, we have compare and contrast. I've heard it said that paradise is very far, but anyone who tries can surely get there. Even if chanting the name Amida only once, a person cannot fail to reach the lotus land. Again, making it very easy within the practice about believing and right living that will actually become part of the 4 noble truths and the noble 8-fold path. Right speech. Are you doing those things and saying Amida or Namu Amida Boots? And that will help you within the process. Note, even here, it's not you earning it. God will help you earn it or forgive you to enable you. Here, you can do it on your own. The power of Amitism Buddhism. And so if you look at the powerful, this is basically considered one of the masters, particularly of early woodwork in all of the world, specifically by Kosho, the Kamakon naturalism maker. So Kosho is the artist. You'll note he's in traveling clothes. He's got a very small gong, which we talked about for realistic details, staff topped by a deer horn, and that sweetly intense expression, really with the wire, with the wood that's still sticking out of his mouth. 800, actually almost 1,000 years now afterwards. It's a remarkable accomplishment. Japanese temples then are these gorgeous images, generally all the way in the west, where are oriented towards east-west axis, where these are in the west. So sun rises in the east, they get beautiful sunsets right over them in the west. So the temple grounds are meant to represent a pure land of paradise on earth, often with beautiful reflections, showing you just by practicing Amida, look where you can attain. So this is the Phoenix Hall in Ryori in Kyoto in Japan. Just gorgeous halls, very similar to what we saw with the Golden Phoenix Hall, or not the Golden Phoenix, the Kinkakuji right before in our last class. There's generally a lotus throne, and the lotus throne is always opening up as the lotus petals represent the souls in the Western paradise. So here we have these petals, there's our individual souls. So the lotus is always absorbing new souls because it's so easy to get in that anyone of good merit will get in. And so this is the Amida Buddha that shows up, the Buddha of boundless light inside the Phoenix Hall. And that's by an artist named Jaco. Now, the other version of Buddhism, and the one you probably know the most about, or believe you know the most about, is going to be the idea of Chan or Zen. These are the original teachings of the Buddha, where the individuals reach their own enlightenment through meditation without the help of deities or magical chants. It's done through meditation. Zen very much appeals to self-disciplined warriors who are not satisfied with Japanese Pure Land or esoteric Buddhism, right? Esoteric Buddhism is too intellectual. It's too difficult. We really do need something that we can work on our own. We're samurai. We're supposed to survive on our own. And Pure Land, it's not difficult enough. It's too easy. It's not really religion. Religion is meant to be work within the process. So as I mentioned before, in Japan, we call it Zen. In Chan, we call it China, or in China, we call it Chan. And in Korea, we call it San. And all those words mean meditation in their local languages. The person who actually invents or comes up with the idea of this as a method is Bodhidharma. He is supposedly the 28th descendant of the Buddha. And the Bodhidharma meets with the Chinese emperor who believes in karma. Good deeds happen to people who are good, bad deeds happen to people who are bad. And the Bodhidharma scoffs at this notion of Buddhism and says it's irrelevant, even though it's a good way for humans to live. It's not necessarily about good beings and bad beings, because you can change. Go back and look at Ashoka, responsible for 100,000 deaths. And because of that, realizes I need to change my ways. If it was just about good or bad, there's no way he's going to overcome those 100 deaths. So the emperor calls Bodhidharma's large nose, and it is large from all accounts, says, "You're a pig nose." And the Bodhidharma turns around and says, he must have a pig mind, because otherwise, why would you see a pig nose? Bodhidharma then is forced to hightail it out of the presence of the king or face probably the deathly consequences, and he heads to Japan. And so we have beautiful images of him in woodblock prints as seen here or here. And this is geisha as Daruma. Daruma is the Japanese name for Bodhidharma, crossing the Red Sea, basically not the actual Red Sea, but the Red Sea on the way from China, the Red Country, to Japan. And so this is by Suzuki Harunobu later on. Zazen, or Zen, basically the idea of meditation, Bodhidharma teaches this. Everything arises from the mind. The nature of the mind is Buddha nature. So everything that comes out is either for or against Buddha, and you need to figure out the differences. All sentient beings, including dogs, have a Buddha nature. And to realize original nature, we've got to observe the mind. So even understanding the Buddhist teaching of Zen can be quite challenging. Everything arises from the mind, or everything is mind. Does that mean there is no real world? It's only what in the mind? Well, we just have a Buddhist koan that just hit us. The nature of the mind is Buddha nature. So everything in the mind actually has something to do with Buddha, either pro or against, or maybe in the middle. Remember, because Buddhism is not always about binaries. All sentient beings have Buddha nature, so we all could be Buddhas. Now, the Chinese Diamond Sutra, the writing that basically talks about Buddhism, it's the oldest known dated printed book in the world. It dates from the Tang Dynasty in 686, and here we see the Chinese Diamond Sutra. And so the Diamond Sutra, as you can see up there, is Lankavatara Sutra, but it teaches consciousness as the only reality, and that all forms of experience are merely manifestations of the mind. Very matrixy, right? What does it mean to be real? Buddhism is even constituted in the idea, what does reality mean? Is reality based upon our senses? Is reality based upon only what's in the mind? Well, in this particular case, reality is only going to be in the mind. That's why Zazen or Zen meditation is so important. So if you read the bottom, and this is from the Diamond Sutra. So listen to this fleeting world. A star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. So on some level, they are all real, but they are not real. They are all real because your mind made them real. But the only reason they're real is because your mind invented them and made them real. So there is a reality, but you're in charge of that reality. And you need to get a hold of that reality and understand that by releasing the reality and not having any of those thoughts at all, making your mind on some level just disappear, that is how you attain Zen enlightenment. You basically become one with what is not there, and that is Zen, a giving up of everything. It's a very challenging form. So artists start to depict and try to get people to think through these very complex ideas. So one of the first individuals who's very responsible for this is a Chinese artist named Mu Qi. And he comes up with the idea of 6 persimmons. He's from the Southern Song dynasty in China. Note, Buddhism is completely across Asia. So we'll see artworks from China and Japan and India and Thailand. His works are considered among the most expressive of Chan, Zen style of painting only in China. The key to Chan paintings is this: it's meditation, the long and thoughtful act of looking. You must look at the painting to understand the true spirit and subject of painting. Is this 6 persimmons or something more? Is it the Buddha and 5 pupils? Is there a hierarchy of pupils? Is there a hierarchy of individuals there? Why is there so much empty space? And the contemplation of the artwork themselves constitute the idea of meditation as you sit and stare and try to ponder, how does this relate to the reality and what's real? Are the persimmons real? It's very Magritte. Magritte had a wonderful painting that some of you may know called The Treachery of Images, which basically it's say n'est pas un pipe. It's a picture of a pipe, and the line underneath it says, this is not a pipe. Well, it's not really a pipe, because a pipe you have to be able to use and smoke, and this is just a picture of a pipe. So is it really a pipe, a representation of a pipe? How do we know what a pipe looks like? What's the assumptions? That's what this is asking from a Zen Buddhist meditation. Now, Zen, because these individuals need to protect themselves, there is a martial arts that develops, and that martial art out of Zen is actually called Shaolin. So it's very meditative, and the monks are going to learn the martial arts to protect their temple because they're worried about a government individual, a government takeover, or another individual coming in, because these are warring times that we live in. And so, in particularly in the Shaolin Temple, instead of traditional Buddhist iconography, Chan devotees revered depictions of the founder and great teachers who succeeded Bodhidharma, so the follow-up Buddhas. By doing so, Chan removed the last visible foreign aspects from Buddhism because they weren't showing him from the Indian perspective moving over. They were getting to the larger scale, more voluptuous movement, because the idea of fatness meant wealth and connoted prosperity within China. The fat booty that they rub on the belly for prosperity. And so it is Shaolin Buddhism, Chan, that came over, that's responsible for all Buddhist images later on, both here in China, looking so portly in general. So without images of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, this new sect eliminated all the foreign appearance. It's for this reason that Chan was able to survive the persecution, which destroyed iconographic Buddhism in China, because they went through an entire process where they wanted to get rid of foreign elements. China, they believed, was getting too many foreign elements, and theirs didn't look foreign. Even though it was a foreign concept, the concept got so rooted in, and the larger portly Buddha actually allowed them to survive. So note, here you will notice the Amitabha Buddha, the apothecary Guan Yin, and Sakya Muni over here. So this is at the Buddha Hall in the Shaolin Temple, where you can still go and take Shaolin classes. So you can see we have children that are actually still there practicing in Buddhist monk robes. These are the individuals that we often see in Kung Fu movies, actually. And so here's the demonstration they do at the Shaolin Temple. And it's pretty remarkable what you can do by controlling your mind and your body, even at a very young age. And it's in the middle of the nothing. It's amazing. So my kids just received their Kung Fu black belt when we had gone to China. And we organized to have them have a class with Kung Fu masters actually here, which was a very cool experience. And it is amazing just to watch so many individuals being so disciplined. All meditative practices within the process as well. Later on, Japanese samurai are going to go through many of the same traditional training techniques. Look at that, that's crazy. And it's all about self-discipline and control. And they do put on shows for tourists to go and see, even if you don't participate. That's how they make a fair amount of their income to pay for the training. When you see it in person, it really is remarkable. And for those who have seen this, actually probably most who have seen this, Kung Fu Panda, this is their depiction of the Shaolin Temple and the remarkable achievements of what's going on here from history. Now they use a kind of an animals to actually show, but there's different styles of Kung Fu based upon the animals they show. There's praying mantis style, there is grasshopper style, there is snake style or cobra style. So they do have these variations within Kung Fu itself. Now, Zen is largely going to impact us when it gets to the modern world. It's going to have the impact on minimalism, reducing art to its bare essentials. So later on, the idea of minimalism that develops in the Western world is based upon these Japanese Zen aesthetics that are coming out of Japan that focus on minimalism. And so as we look at different things and think about it in the modern day world, we get into things like this. What is this meaning of this contemporary artwork? So this is a temple offering by Wang Song from China. And note the nudity in everyone, but they are leaning up on someone in a prayer gesture that shows up against the Buddha, who's very much in a reclining, happy Buddhist pose, not a meditating pose like we've seen earlier. So we're challenging notions of what the Buddha means. Later on, we're going to get things such as the artwork today of Lotus Blossom from 2007 by Sanford Biggers, who specifically uses the lotus blossoms here, with the lotus blossoms to show interest in that you have to look behind and always know and always be reflecting. The lotus blossoms here are actually the slave pack of a ship that's actually done in paper that's been mounted. So each one of these is a slave ship where probably 300 individuals lost their freedom. And so even behind what you may see from a distance, you've got to look closer to know all the details. And so that's what they're actually looking at when we look at Buddhist art that has an influence today from around the world. All right, now before we get to that, I'm going to escape out and I want to screen share with you a different video. Now, as we shift gears and look a little bit from the Shaolin Chan version that actually shows up in China, we start looking a little bit more at the Zen version in Zen Buddhism. There are some slight variations as we'll talk about. But Zen is based upon the original teachings of the historical Buddha, where individuals are supposed to reach their own enlightenment through meditation, really without the help of deities or magical chants. So the samurai, the self-sufficiency is very much going to play out. So Zen very much appealed to the disciplined warriors who were not satisfied with Japanese Pure Land or esoteric Buddhism, as I mentioned before. What they are going to look at is that they very much are going to want to be self-sufficient. That's the whole idea. And so one of the most famous amongst them is an individual monk named Baizhang. And Baizhang said, "A day without work is a day of no eating. Why would someone else work to feed me? Unless I'm sick or I need help, a day without work is no eating." So when the students thought Baizhang was thought to be too old to work in the garden, his devotees hid his gardening tools, saying, "You're too old for this, we will help you." In response, Baizhang, the master, refused to eat, saying, "No working, no living." That's the whole point of Zen. It's the idea of meditation. And so, what Zen is going to emphasize, particularly in a Japanese context, is going to be the following. Zen is going to talk about this, and we're going to see this in the artwork as well. So, Zen is going to impact us. It's going to be about a life of humility, a life of labor, a life of service, a life of prayer and gratitude, and a life of meditation. And he believes very much that's what the historical Buddha, remember, the historical Buddha had sex and alcohol and women available to him. And he said, no, how can we live if we don't have a right path out of the individual that shows up in the modern day world when there's suffering and there's death and there's old age and there's sickness? There must be a better way. And Zen and Baizhang very much approach that. And so a very famous Japanese philosopher and poet, Dogen here, or Dojin, says, enlightenment is like the moon reflecting in water or lakes or dewdrops. The water reflects all of the moon in an ever-changing myriad of images, but does not hinder the moon, just as enlightenment does not hinder your ethereal presence. So even after enlightenment, like a bodhisattva, you are still here, you're still present. You've given a guide to someone else who could potentially follow in your footsteps because you have attained enlightenment. And so the whole idea is to come up with different ways of enlightenment that work for you and act as models for others to follow, knowing that everyone is on their own individual path. So if you look at monk sewing by Kao from the Kamakura period, says the early 14th century in Japan. So here's the overall artwork. Here's a blow up so you can actually see. But note the asymmetry that shows up. So the Japanese Zen aesthetic, Stanley, that we see, based upon a life of hard work and humility and working on your own and meditation, the Japanese Zen aesthetics to actually put in here are the Spartan details with space. That open space is called Ma. A life of hard work, self-reliance, asymmetry, art about reflection, and the natural elements here are representing religious ideals. And so look across and what do you see? Very Spartan details, not a lot of details. Life of hard work, right? They're pulling apart here. He's clearly self-reliant as he makes his own outfit. Asymmetry, look how asymmetrical this is. The art is reflection for the idea of Kao. And the natural elements here are going to show those ideas of the religious ideas coming out of Zen. He's on his own doing what he needs to do. Another example of Zen artwork that comes out of Zen monk Seshutoyo, who basically wants to show the four seasons and how monks and individuals know, very similar looking to Chinese painting, but can't be read like Chinese painting. Oh, that mountain, it's all about how you would fit in and do work. And this is often considered one of the best Japanese ink paintings in history. And it represents all four seasons, the spring, the fall, the summer, the winter. And it basically asks you, as a monk, as a Zen, how do you fit in and how do you survive in the agrarian environments in these very rural elements of the world? How do you use self-reliance? How do you show and prove that you are responsible for yourself? How do you show compassion and help others? How do you make sure that you don't cause any harm to any other living being? And that's what the painting is asking you to consider. So he is known, Zen monk Sesshu Toyo again, for the Muromachi period here. He is known as a master of a couple of different styles. So he challenges the human spirit to comprehend the landscape in meditative Zen manner. How do you fit in? And note his various styles to get you various ways of thinking. There's the splash or broken ink, the most Zen of all of them. Not a lot of details, a lot of a lot of self-reliance. You need to figure out what the painting is. His most formal style, which he originally is educated in, and that is actually what we saw in the painting before the Four Seasons, and very much a mature style, which is kind of a blending between the two. Not so formulaic as the formal, not so abstract. It kind of combines the best of both worlds. So the most famous Zen art form then in the world is created. It's called the tea ceremony. It is literally established or formalized by the Japanese tea Zen master Sen no Rikyu from 1521 to 1591. So this would be during the end of the Renaissance in the Western world or the beginning of the Baroque world, if you know your history. So the tea ceremony here is called cha no yu, which basically means hot water for tea. You can see this is what a house looks like, a Japanese tea house with paper folding windows, one alcove then over here to actually show a beautiful scroll, which you can actually contemplate. Generally the sounds of water in a garden. And this is where the actual tea is grown, is right outside of the tea house. Now, when you go to the Senno Rikyo or any of the other tea houses, you place yourself where your age is. So age trumps everything over rank. So if you are the oldest individual, you would outrank someone who's younger. So even if you were older than the emperor, you would go here and you would outrank the emperor because age matters here in terms of reflection. And so if you, as you look at the different, this is going to be the hole that opens up where you can actually, there's a hole down here where you can actually have the tea itself. So this is going to be the hearth. The entrance mat is that first mat when you come in. That's going to be one. This is going to be two. This is area three. This is area four, the hearth, and area five. This is where the tea master would actually come in. And the tea master would serve tea. And basically in very small, very intimate gatherings, you get to actually experience. Now, generally, the tea utensils and the kaishi tea papers, you bring your own papers for sweets if there's going to be sweets. But they will wash and clean and show you all these natural elements while they're making the tea for you. So it's part of the process. So the tea making ceremony very much might take 45 minutes to 2 hours. It's supposed to be a reflective Zen process on how you fit in with culture and nature around you. So there's all sorts of tea ceremony manners for guests. And you can see you take your shoes off, you bring your own paper, you split things and generally share things. There's the idea of getting a tea bowl. And when you get a tea bowl, you turn it to the 90 degrees and take a drink, and then you put it down and turn it another 90 degrees. So it's on the opposite side before you hand the tea bowl back. That way multiple people can share. So if you ever go to one of these, look at all the ritual steps that happen. Each utensil is going to be richly cleaned in front of you. They're going to measure the green tea and hot water is added. The tea is going to be whisked. Guests relax, enjoy the sounds of water, fire, the smell of incense, beauty of the tea house. The tea bowl is served to the first guest of honor, the oldest. Bowls are exchanged between the host and the guest. The guest bows to the second guest and raises the bowl in respect. The guest rotates the bowl to avoid drinking from its front, takes a sip. The host cleans the utensils then. The guest of honor will request that the host will allow the guest to examine the utensils because they're highly valued items. The items are treated with extreme care and reverence as they are frequently priceless items, irreplaceable, they're almost always handmade, and guests often use a special cloth to handle them just in case you are dirty and you want to mess up anything that happens there. The host still collects the utensils and the guests finally leave the tea house. The host bows from the door and the ceremony is over. So the tea ceremony itself, depending on if there's any courses of food, may last 1 to 5 hours. A lot of the tea ware is going to be done with lacquerware, which is a highly expensive, manipulated item from nature, showing you kind of the formula that shows up. So it's generally made with a coiled woven bamboo strip base mixed with horsehair. Ashes and sawdust from the sumac tree sap are mixed like a putty inside of it. The object is coated layer upon layer, and it takes weeks to dry. Eventually, it's going to be polished and smooth, and then it's going to be engraved, commonly, as you can see here, this beautiful one, using red, green, and yellow colors. And for a small vessel, like I'll show you in class, which is the size about this, which is a tea canister holder, it takes 6 to 8 months to make a small vessel and 2 years for a large piece. But basically, you have taken woven bamboo throwaway that doesn't support water, and you've now made it beautiful and waterproof. So lacquerware is one of the great aspects. And here are the different steps. You say it takes, so you take this, strips of bamboo, and you make it into this. All from these strips. That's the sumac tree where you get that reddish color that shows up that you put on top of it. And an item like this, a small item like that, that's probably $120 because of the workmanship. They all have to be handmade. So if we look at it here.
Lacquerware is created by items made of wood with layers of lacquer, a natural resin obtained from the lacquer tree. Lacquer tableware, such as serving boxes and bowls, is an essential aspect of Japanese culinary culture and widely used even today. Lacquer, known as urushi in Japanese, is a natural material obtained from the sap of a particular tree. These urushi trees have been cultivated as a source of lacquer since ancient times. When the trunk of a tree is cut, it produces a resin to try and repair the wound. This resin is urushi. The resin is a milky white color when it is collected. Various pigments are added to color this resin. For example, if iron powder is added, it causes a chemical reaction with the lacquer which turns it black. The colored lacquer is used as a coating on the wooden base. After a layer of lacquer has been applied evenly, it is left to dry. This process is repeated numerous times to build up a surface that gives the item durability and luster. The bowl is coated with black lacquer. The deep gleam adds a sense of refinement to its beauty. This type of lacquerware is frequently seen in Japan. This tray has been varnished with a clear lacquer. In this technique, the wood itself is impregnated with the lacquer. The natural gleam highlights the beauty of the grain of the wood. Akira Murayama is one of Japan's leading wood craftsmen, and he has been recognized as a living national treasure. Most of Murayama's works are lacquered using a technique known as fuki-urushi. This is how the fuki-urushi technique is done. First, a coating of lacquer is applied to the wood using a brush. The urushi is wiped thoroughly with a cloth to ensure that it has been applied evenly. Allowing the wood to soak up the lacquer helps to make the patterns of the grain stand out more clearly. The surface is then carefully polished with sandpaper. This entire procedure is then repeated 5 or 6 more times. The coat of urushi is applied, then polished and sandpapered. Repeating these steps ensures that the simple, natural beauty of the wood is seen at its best. The entire process can take months to produce a single piece. Here are some of the pieces that Murayama has made using the Fukiurushi technique. He says he tries to listen to the voice of the wood as he works. In these pieces, the surface of the wood seems to emanate a gentle warmth. Lacquer working techniques like this help to impart an extra depth of beauty to wood, which is.
And so it's beautiful on what these actually images can do. And large scale, later on, we're going to see this. This is basically what a geisha later on, their lacquerware chest is going to look like. Lacquerware bowls for food or for tea ceremonies are sometimes often used, as well as cosmetic cases. And so they can be quite expensive, into the thousands of dollars. And when you go into a Japanese tea ceremony, everyone is welcome. So here's my family actually visiting one in the middle of Kyoto, where we actually went and loved the tea. You can say we brought our own kashi because we knew the rules. You put all your information, all your stuff over there. You sit on the mat, and then you are offered a snack before you're actually served your tea. So many people will go this. Now, the most famous tea bowls in history actually have names. And so the tea bowl ware is generally called raku, which means enjoyment ware. And so some of the most famous then we'll see here. Here we have one by Chojiro with no title name. This is a tea bowl that's called Mount Fuji because of the coloration. And the artist was Honami Koetsu. So even the tea bowls are named. And this one by Honami Koetsu, another one, is called With the Help of Heaven. And I have a model of these I'll bring into class. The Japanese raku enjoyment ware means it's traditionally used in the tea ceremony. And they're characterized almost always by hand molding clay, resulting in each piece being one of a kind. They are all unique and spectacular. In the traditional Japanese firing process, the fired raku is removed from the hot kiln and put directly into water or allowed to cool in the open air, which is unusual. Normally you're allowed to let cool in the firing kiln for a while. In the 16th century, the Japanese tea master, again, Sen Rikyu, had a tile maker named Chojiro produce hand-molded tea bowls for use in the wabi style. Wabi-sabi, the idea of stillness and rusticity. And so this is one of those tea bowls by Chojiro that was actually made for Sen no Rikyu. For those of you that know Samurai Jack, here's him at a tea ceremony. So it comes across even in popular culture.
This is terrible.
Sorry, Samurai Jack. But even in terms of the idea, that's what we're looking at. So we look at the tea bowl called Mount Fuji. It's done by Honami Koetsu. He was trained as a sword polisher, a very highly respected profession. But he was very accomplished in pottery, lacquer, calligraphy, ceramics, as a result of his interest in Japanese tea ceremony. And Koetsu was given clay by Donyu II. That's the grandson of the first raku potter ever, Chojiro, and that's what he made this with. So the idea that it was passed on through the generations of someone who worked with Sen no Rikyo is very famous. So how do we evaluate Japanese tea bowls? Well, two things. One is going to be according to Japanese Zen aesthetics. Spartan details with conceptual space ma to move throughout it. Images that show a life of hard work and self-reliance. Asymmetrical. It should be about reflection and what you think about as you see it. And the natural elements then that are being used in the colors embody religious ideas, the darkness, the coloration, the shifting values. So the tea bowl then shows an extremely subtle sense of beauty, how well a tea bowl fits in your hands, how subtly the shape texture appears, and who had previously used or admired the tea bowl. All those become part of these. So using those, which one of these tea bowls would the Japanese consider the greatest accomplishments? This is what you're going to use. You're going to use these sensibility to determine which of these is the most important. And that's what we'll do in class. Any last questions then that we have on Japanese tea ceremony or on the different aspects? Remember, because in Japan, we've looked at 3 different elements then of Buddhism, right? We looked at esoteric Buddhism, which is for the landed aristocracy who could afford to take time to really develop the sensibility on meditation. We looked at the quicker, easier way called Pure Land Buddhism, which is still the most common today. And then Zen Buddhism, which is really promoted by the samurais of ritual and self-reliance and self-practice. So there's 3 major versions that show up. Thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful night. Bye.